Very much. Thank you, Minister. Good to be back here. I think it was in this location about 9 months ago that I first stood up. It's been a long year. So only one new case of coronavirus today in Victoria. As the Minister said, it's a low positive in an individual who's had several previous negative tests. I think I explained yesterday we can get these indeterminate results or results where there's only a weak signal on the test. They are a normal part of testing. When you're doing 20,000 plus tests a day, you'll get one or two. Previously, we would have had a couple every day as well, but amongst dozens and dozens of positive cases, we're not digging down to those results so specifically as we are now. You know, the likelihood is with few to no true cases being detected, these low positives will obviously become more prominent. But the expert review panel looks at the pathology results, exactly the details of those results. The reference laboratory often reruns the test to try and give a definitive answer on them, and they get resolved within 24 or 48 hours. So we should have an answer on this after the panel meets today, or there might be some further clarification through the reference lab, and we can update tomorrow. In terms of those recovered numbers, really there were thousands of notified cases through July and August. A very small percentage of them, for reasons of changed address or changed phone number, were not contactable. But it's been over 28 days since they were initially notified, and it's fair to call them recovered. Obviously, we do a check with the Registry of Births, Deaths and Marriages to make sure that none of them have been notified as deaths. And if that's the case, then classifying them as recovered is a conservative thing to do after 28 days. The great majority of people recover within 10 days, so 28 days is a reasonable cutoff to reconcile those numbers. Happy to take questions.
Yeah, Brett, I guess I sense a little bit of mixed messaging. On one hand, we're doing really well, but you are still nervous. I guess how... And I personally feel a sense of FOGO, fear of going out. How should, can you tell people how they should be feeling, or what can they be feeling?
I can't tell people what to feel. I would say, we deserve to enjoy ourselves now. We've gotten to this incredible point where case numbers are very low, and we've got days of literally no true cases. And so we should go out with all the precautions that we've talked about. But we need to enjoy our lives after, 3 months of really constrained activity. So I can't speak for someone's personal, levels of risk tolerance or the anxiety that they might feel. But I'm confident going out. We know how to protect ourselves. It's doing the right thing. It's wearing a mask. It's keeping your distance, and it's making sure that if there are people who are unwell around us, that we're not interacting with them. Those individuals need to be home and getting tested. But otherwise, doing the right things with hand hygiene, with cough etiquette, with wearing masks, we can go about our lives, and we shouldn't be fearful. The precautionary bit is about the fact that this pandemic started with a single person in December last year, and we're now at 50 million cases globally. And so we always have to be super precautionary about how we maintain control over this, and not be complacent about the fact that one case or a few dozen active cases means that we never have to think about control and vigilance again. We need to remain vigilant because there are countries in Europe that were in a celebratory mood just a few months ago that are going through the worst times right now, and that's because as long as this virus is around in the world, we need to be vigilant, and we need to make sure that we're on top of it continuously. That's our job, but people can go about their lives with those changed behaviours, and I think people are doing that, and I hope that people don't feel a huge sense of anxiety and burden about getting back to that normal way of life. But these are hard habits. We've been in our homes for a long time now, so I think we just need to move gradually to that sense of a new normal.
Just one more on that point. terms of elderly grandparents, people who are vulnerable but not as such immunosuppressed, I know you can't tell everyone what to do on an individual basis, but is it safe to see grandparents here?
Yeah, it is. Obviously, we're saying you can go to another house within 25 kilometres. You can visit as one household of 2 plus dependents. That's a reasonable thing to do. We're doing that at a staged approach, very incrementally, because we don't want to see a wholesale movement of people where it suddenly turns up in the numbers 2 or 3 weeks from now, and we've got a dozen cases that are right across Melbourne. So that's an appropriate small step to take. But if we didn't think that it could be done, we wouldn't be saying that it's allowed and it's a reasonable thing to do. So yes, but again, I would always say if you're unwell, get tested first, get that result back, and don't visit anyone if you've got compatible symptoms. And it's mild illness in some individuals, but it can be obviously fatal or very severe illness in those elderly people.
Brett, over the last few days, cafes and restaurants have been packing people on pavements and outdoor tables. Obviously, technically, they're meeting the density requirements. People seem to be sitting shoulder to shoulder outside without a mask on because they're eating. Are the restrictions too simple in that respect?
I think they have to be simple. We can't oversee each and every table and outdoor dining area. We're asking businesses to do the right thing. The density quotient is 1 person per 2 square metres outside. That's a reasonable precaution, but the individual has to do the right thing as well. If you're facing away from each other, the risk is much less. Outdoors is 18 to 20 times less risky than indoors. So it doesn't become so much of an issue to be in reasonably close proximity to other people. But everyone should be aware of what they need to do, and you should cancel that appointment if you're cancel that booking if you're unwell. Don't go out if you're unwell, and if you feel uncomfortable in a space because actually people are facing you and closer than they should be, then find another space. Vote with your feet in terms of being in a setting where you're comfortable and where those requirements are being met.
I was going to say, it's been a pretty promising week on the case numbers. It seems like the northern suburbs outbreak is pretty much calmed down. Is it fair to say that we have no chains of transmission going on right now?
Look, as long as there are active cases, we want all of those active cases to recover, and all of their close contacts who are in quarantine really need to complete their 14-day quarantine period before we can say that that's not an active chain of transmission. But most people will develop illness 5 or 6 days after being exposed. So when that's not coming up, with new cases within households or within these clusters, it's absolutely reassuring. And I think that's because people have quarantined away from those active cases, or those active cases have isolated apart from their other close contacts. That's how you get on top of this. And it's really good to see no new cases emerging from those existing clusters.
The case today, can you tell us which hospital it is?
No, I can't.
For privacy reasons? For
privacy reasons, it's a single case for the day.
Can you tell us what, I assume they're not a COVID patient if they're previously tested negative. Do you know what ward they're in?
So that they are in a specialist ward, but yeah, it's fair to say they weren't admitted for suspected COVID, but they've had testing because of those compatible symptoms. That's the right thing for hospitals to do. Anyone who's got shortness of breath or cough or fever should be tested accordingly. And a number of negative tests is obviously reassuring, but when you've got a low positive, you just need to rule it out as a true case.
Are you concerned about people, particularly on the public holiday on Monday? The weather's meant to be unbelievable. This is the first weekend has been effectively out of lockdown. Are you concerned about crowd behaviours on those days?
I think the great majority of Melburnians know what to do. There'll be a few who are maybe a bit liberal in their behaviour. I think it's appropriate for people to enjoy the outdoors. I would always urge people to do the right thing, and the key things are not being out when unwell. and obviously wearing masks. But outdoors is a lower risk environment. I want people to enjoy the sunshine. I want people to enjoy the company of others, but to do it within those rules. And if that's how people go about it, it'll be a great day. And I think we'll all feel the uplift with a public holiday where people are getting out and about.
Can I ask you about work? When do you think you might tell people in Melbourne that they can return to the office to be working?
Look, I guess it always depends, as it has along the way, what the next couple of weeks shows and whether these trends that we've seen are sustained. Obviously, we've only gone to this much more open movement in recent days. But if we can see that these chains of transmission are in check, then I think there's a reasonable chance of a slow and steady but a graduated return to the workplace. But it won't be a wholesale movement on a particular day. It'll be a consideration about what it means to be able to go back to workplaces and maintain that distance and not be packed into office spaces, which obviously a higher risk as an indoor setting.
Do you think office workers could be back this year then, before Christmas?
I think some can and should return, but again, always depending on the numbers. Clearly, there's an economic activity by virtue of return to work, especially here in the CBD, and that should be a consideration, but it has to be safe and steady for sure.
I remember reading something earlier saying that if all the office workers were to go back with lifts and social distancing, for example, you might be lining up for 4 hours till you can get the lift to yourself. How much work do you think will go into making sure that offices can go back and operate safely? Is that a lot of preparation? Yeah, there is a lot of preparation, but those offices have been working through that. Those sectors and businesses have been working through that, and they'll make arrangements for people who can still work from home to continue that. It's there's a clear reflection on the fact that some people who've worked remotely want a mix of on-site and off-site working, and that they can manage it perfectly well, and that they're as happy, if not happier, with those circumstances. I think that's for businesses to ultimately have a negotiation and make a judgment about with those staff. But it'll be a changed workplace in that regard. But yes, there are some pinch points, public transport, lifts, that need to be worked through. But I think, again, if the numbers remain low, then those risks become much less in the office space as well.
Do you think it'll be a changed workforce until there's a vaccine, that we'll have this sort of staggered, some work from home right up until there's a vaccine? Yeah,
look, I'm not a social anthropologist, but I would say there's potential that it's a changed workforce forever. I think people have discovered things about how they can be supported in remote working arrangements ongoing, and many people will choose that for some of the flexibility and some of the wellbeing issues that it manages to support. But clearly it needs to be negotiated and supported by those businesses and by those employers to make it work.
Would you prefer, or do you think your advice will be keep working at home if you can until we get a vaccine, for example?
Look, it's hard to say. I think there's obviously a lot of benefit in people working from home in terms of how much physical distancing is possible on public transport and how much physical distancing is possible in the office space. So again, for people who are comfortable and happy and can be supported to work from home, that's not an unreasonable thing to kind of embed ongoing.
Just a question, sorry to give you off.
Oh, for me, sorry?
No,
for the Minister.
The Health Minister.
Yeah, not completely settled yet. There's no kind of flags of concern with them. They do look like they're likely to be finally classified as negative ultimately, but they do need to go through that additional testing and reference testing, as well as the epidemiological investigation. If someone hasn't been exposed to a confirmed case, that's obviously evidence that it's more likely to be a false positive.
Are there any that look like they could be reinfection?
In recent days, we've had some that are potentially reinfections, but we do need the really definitive evidence of reinfection with a new virus is having the genomic sequence from the initial infection and comparing it to the current infection and seeing that they're different. Otherwise, it's very hard to rule out the possibility that it's just someone who's got prolonged shedding of virus.